My wife spent $40,000 of my money on our charity. Hello, welcome my channel. I have a new story for you today.
My wife spent $40,000 of my money on our 20th anniversary party and invited 80 people I had never met. When I stood up to give a toast, she reached for my hand under the table and whispered, "Keep it short, Harold. These are important people." What she did not know was that the most important person in that room was the man she had been stealing from for 7 years. And he was about to give the longest toast of his life. But I need to take you back before I take you forward. Because if you do not understand who I was before that night, you will never understand what I became during it. My name is Harold Monroe. I am 57 years old. I have been a structural engineer for 32 years, all of them spent at the same firm, Callaway and Briggs, in Charlotte, North Carolina. I design bridges, not the famous ones you see on postcards, the ones you drive over every day without thinking about them. The overpass on Independence Boulevard, the pedestrian bridge near the university campus, the interchange ramp on I-77 that carries 40,000 cars a day and has never shifted a single inch since I signed off on the load calculations in 2009. That is what I do. I build things that hold. My salary is $114,000 a year. I have earned within 10% of that number for the last decade. I drive a 2017 Ford F-150 with 162,000 miles on it. I wear the same 3 pairs of work boots and ration. I eat the same lunch every day, turkey on wheat, an apple, black coffee. I have not taken a vacation longer than 4 days since 2016. I am not a flashy man. I have never wanted to be. My father, Earl Monroe, was a mason who laid brick for 41 years and never once called in sick. He built the retaining wall behind First Baptist Church on Beatty's Ford Road when I was 9. I stood beside him that entire Saturday, handing him bricks one at a time, and he never once told me to go play. He just looked down at me every so often and said, "Feel that, Harold? Feel how the mortar grabs?" That is what holding looks like. He taught me that a man's worth is measured by what he builds and what he keeps standing. I believed that. I still believe it. But I learned something at 57 that my father never had to learn. Sometimes the thing that falls is not a bridge or a building. Sometimes it is the belief that the people you trust are standing on the same foundation you are. I need to tell you about my brother, because without Franklin, none of this story exists. Franklin Earl Monroe was my older brother by 5 years. He was everything I was not. Loud where I was quiet, reckless where I was careful, ambitious where I was steady. When we were kids, he would climb the water tower behind the old textile mill on Statesville Avenue while I stood at the bottom with my arms crossed, telling him he was going to break his neck. He never broke his neck. He just climbed higher and yelled down, "You coming or not, Harold?" I never climbed. But I never left either. I stood at the bottom every single time, watching, waiting, ready to run for help if he fell. That was our dynamic. Franklin took risks. I held the ground. Our father loved us both, but he understood us differently. He would watch Franklin tear apart a lawnmower engine at 14 and say, "That boy is going to either build an empire or burn one down." Then he would watch me recalculate my geometry homework for the 3rd time and say, "And that one is going to make sure the empire stays standing." Franklin left Charlotte at 22 with $600 and a duffel bag. He stood in the driveway of our parents' house on a Tuesday morning in October of 1983. And my father came out in his work boots and said, "Son, you already are something. Come lay brick with me." Franklin shook his head. "No, sir. I am going to own the buildings, not build them." My father looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "Then build them right." Franklin hugged him, slapped me on the shoulder, got in his car, and drove away. I stood in that driveway and watched until the car turned the corner. I was 17. I did not know it then, but that was the last time my brother and I would stand in the same place for a very long time. He spent his 20s bouncing between cities: Atlanta, Memphis, Dallas, sometimes sleeping in his car, sometimes sleeping on job sites. He worked construction, flipped small properties, learned the business from the mud up. Every few months he would call home, and my mother would put him on speakerphone. He would tell stories about deals he was working on, buildings he was renovating, neighborhoods he was watching. My father would listen quietly and then say the same thing every time. Are you building it right, Franklin? By the time Franklin was 35, he had purchased his first commercial building in downtown Charlotte, a 2-story office space on East Trade Street that he renovated himself, every wall, every fixture, every square foot of flooring. By 40, he had 3 more buildings. By 50, he had a portfolio that generated steady income, managed quietly, without fanfare, without social media, without anyone in our family knowing the full extent of it. But Franklin and I had not spoken in 15 years. The rift started after our father died in 2009. Earl Monroe had a heart attack on a Wednesday afternoon while pointing brick on a garden wall in Myers Park. He was 73. He died doing what he had done every day of his adult life, holding things together. Franklin came to the funeral. He wore a dark suit I had never seen before and shoes that were too expensive for the man I remembered. He sat in the front row beside me. He did not cry. When the pastor finished, Franklin stood, walked to the casket, placed his hand on the wood, and said something so quiet that no one else heard it. Then he looked at me and said, "Take care of Mama." He stayed 2 days. We barely spoke. Not because of anger, because of something harder to name. Distance that had calcified into silence. He left on a Thursday morning without saying goodbye. He called me on my birthday for 3 more years, each call shorter than the last, and then he stopped. I called him twice. Voicemail both times. I left messages. He never returned them. My mother passed in 2014. Franklin did not come to the funeral. He sent flowers, white lilies, no card. That was the last sign of life I received from my brother for 10 years. Diane said he was probably jealous of our stability. Constance said some people simply do not value family. I said nothing because I did not have an explanation that satisfied me, and I'd learned to stop chasing things I could not solve. Now let me tell you about Diane. Because Diane is where this story finds its teeth. Diane Ridley was 34 when I married her. I was 37. A late start by most standards, but it felt right at the time. She was an office manager at a dental practice on South Boulevard. We met at a Thanksgiving potluck hosted by a mutual friend. She brought a sweet potato casserole that was, I will admit, the best I had ever tasted. She was organized, direct, and had a way of making a room feel managed just by walking into it. I found that attractive. After years of living alone in a quiet apartment eating dinner over blueprints, I wanted someone who would bring structure to the parts of my life I had neglected. She did. She structured everything. Within the first year of marriage, Diane took over the household finances. It started naturally enough. She was better at it, faster, more attentive to due dates and interest rates, and the small mechanical details that I found tedious. I would come home from a 12-hour day on the job site, boots caked with red Carolina clay, and she would have the bills sorted, the budget updated, the investment contributions scheduled. She would hand me a summary at the end of each month, a single page, clean numbers, everything accounted for. I would glance at it, nod, and say, "Looks good." That phrase became the signature of my marriage. Looks good when she refinanced the mortgage without telling me first. Looks good when she moved our savings into an account I did not have online access to. Looks good when she suggested I switch my direct deposit to the joint account and let her manage the allocation. I said it because I trusted her. I said it because I was tired, and I said it because fighting Diane over money was like arguing with a spreadsheet. She always had the numbers, and I never had the patience. Diane quit her job 8 years into the marriage. She said she wanted to focus on managing our household full-time. I did not argue. By then the pattern was set. I earned, she managed. The household ran on a single engine, mine, and a single pilot, hers. Diane's mother moved in 12 years ago. Constance Ridley, 78 years old now, sharp as a scalpel, quiet as a closing door. She had sold her house in Raleigh after Diane's father passed and needed a place to stay. That is how Diane presented it. Mama needs us. It is the right thing to do. She will not be any trouble. Constance was not trouble in the way most people understand trouble. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She did not make demands. She made suggestions. She made observations. She had spent 30 years as a bookkeeper for a property management company in Raleigh, and she understood numbers the way I understood load-bearing calculations, instinctively, structurally, with an eye for where the weight was shifting before anyone else noticed. She positioned herself in conversations the way a chess piece positions itself 3 moves before the checkmate. You never saw it coming because it never looked like an attack. It looked like wisdom. Harold, a man who does not manage his own money, is a man who does not manage his own life. She said that to me once, early on, sitting at the kitchen table with her reading glasses low on her nose and a cup of Earl Grey in her hand. I remember thinking she was talking about someone else. She was talking about me. Over the years, Constance and Diane developed a rhythm that was invisible unless you knew to look for it. Diane handled execution, Constance handled strategy, and I handled the earning. That was the arrangement, unspoken but absolute. Every dollar I made went into the joint account. Diane moved it. Constance advised where. And I came home, ate dinner, watched the news, and went to bed believing my family was secure. Now I need to tell you about the night everything cracked. It was a Tuesday in January of 2024. I had stayed late at the office, not by choice, but by necessity. We were running final stress calculations on a bridge rehabilitation project on Highway 74, and one of the tension cable ratings had come back inconsistent. I ran the numbers 3 times, corrected the discrepancy, updated the file, and shut down my computer at 7:18 in the evening. The office was empty. The fluorescent lights hummed. Traffic whispered through the windows. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something, maybe instinct, maybe exhaustion making me careless, made me answer. Mr. Monroe, a man's voice said, clear and professional. This is Victor Aldridge of Aldridge and Keene. I am calling regarding your brother, Franklin Monroe. I set my pencil down. Is he all right? There was a brief pause that carried its own answer. Mr. Monroe, I regret to inform you that your brother passed away on January 3rd. A heart attack. He was 62 years old. I did not speak for several seconds. The fluorescent light above my desk buzzed. The heater clicked on in the hallway. Outside, a car horn sounded once, far away, meaningless. I did not know, I said. I understand, Victor replied. Franklin was a very private man. He left specific instructions regarding his estate, and you are listed as his sole beneficiary. I leaned back in my chair. Sole beneficiary. We had not spoken in 15 years. He was aware of that, Victor said. He updated his will 18 months ago. You are the only person named. There are significant assets involved. I would prefer to review them with you in person. Can you come to my office tomorrow? I agreed. I hung up the phone. And I sat in that empty office for 20 minutes without moving, staring at the blueprint on my desk without seeing a single line. Franklin. My brother who climbed water towers, who drove away with a duffel bag, who put his hand on our father's casket and whispered something only the dead could hear. Gone. And in his final act, he had chosen me. The next morning, I told Diane I had an early meeting and left the house at 7:30. She did not ask what kind of meeting. She rarely did. My work was a black box to her, steady income entering one end, nothing interesting coming out the other. Victor Aldridge's office was on the 14th floor of a building in uptown Charlotte, a high-rise I had actually consulted on during its construction phase, reviewing the parking deck foundations. The reception area was quiet and expensive, the kind of quiet that costs money to maintain. Victor met me in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. A skyline that included 2 buildings my brother owned. He was a man in his late 50s, silver-haired, deliberate, with the kind of stillness that comes from decades of handling other people's most vulnerable moments. He placed a file on the table between us and opened it with practiced efficiency. Your brother accumulated significant holdings over the past 25 years, he began. The estate consists of the following: 2 commercial properties in downtown Charlotte, both fully leased, located on East Trade Street and South Tryon Street, with a combined appraised value of $2,400,000. An investment portfolio with Vanguard and Schwab accounts totaling approximately $920,000. A money market account holding $318,000 in liquid cash. Personal property, including a vehicle and furnishings, valued at approximately $62,000. After estimated taxes, legal fees, and administrative costs, the net value of the estate is approximately $3,800,000. $3,800,000. I stared at the document. I read the numbers twice, then a third time. I counted the zeros. I checked the decimal points. I did what I do. I verified the structure. This cannot be right, I said. It is, Victor replied. Your brother was disciplined and private. He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Noda. He drove a Honda Accord. Most of his income was reinvested. He lived like a man who did not care about appearing wealthy because he was too busy actually building wealth. I looked up. Why me? We were estranged. Victor reached into the file and produced a sealed envelope. Cream-colored, heavy paper. My name on the front in Franklin's handwriting, angular and impatient, like the pen could not keep up with his thoughts. He said you would ask that, Victor said. He left this for you. I opened the envelope carefully, the way you handle something you know you will keep forever. Harold. I know we lost time. That was my fault more than yours. I was too proud to come back and too stubborn to explain why I left. But I watched you, brother. I drove past your house on holidays. I read about your bridge projects in the Charlotte Observer. I sat in the back row of the ribbon cutting for the pedestrian bridge at UNC Charlotte, and I watched you shake the mayor's hand, and you looked exactly like Daddy looked when he finished a wall. Proud but quiet about it. You are the most consistent man I have ever known. And I do not mean that as an insult. I mean it as the highest compliment I am capable of giving. Daddy was right about us. I was the one who would either build an empire or burn one down. And you were the one who would make sure it stayed standing. I am leaving you everything because you are the only person I trust to not waste it. Do not let anyone else manage this for you, Harold. Manage it yourself. You have always been smarter than you think. Your brother, Franklin. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. My hands were steady. They are always steady. But something behind my ribs was not. I thought about standing at the bottom of that water tower, watching my brother climb, and I realized he had been watching me the whole time from the top. Victor waited. Then he said, "There is no rush to make decisions today, but I do need your formal acceptance to begin the transfer process." I signed. On the drive home, I gripped the steering wheel and thought about what to do next. The old version of me, the version from yesterday, would have walked through the front door, sat Diane down at the kitchen table, and said, "You will not believe what happened." I would have handed her the documents the way I handed her my paycheck every 2 weeks, fully, openly, without reservation. And she would have managed it. She would have taken the numbers, reorganized them, decided where the money should go, and presented me with a plan that I would review for 30 seconds and approve with 2 words. Looks good, but something had already shifted. Not dramatically, not with fireworks or revelation, more like the moment a bridge cable reaches its rated load capacity. You cannot see it from the outside. The steel looks the same. But inside, at the molecular level, the fibers have begun to separate. Franklin's letter was in my briefcase on the passenger seat. Do not let anyone else manage this for you. I did not tell Diane. That evening, I sat at the dinner table and listened. Not the way I usually listened, passively, half attentive, waiting for the conversation to end so I could check the sports scores. I listened the way I examine a structural blueprint, looking for stress points, testing loads, identifying where the weight was being carried and where it was being hidden. Diane was talking about the anniversary party. She had been planning it for months. Our 20th anniversary was in April, and she had decided it needed to be a statement. I booked the grand over, she said, cutting into her chicken without looking up. The main ballroom, 80 guests. I paused. 80? She glanced at me, fork suspended. We know a lot of people, Harold. We did not know 80 people. I could name maybe 25, and half of those I had not spoken to in years. Who are the rest? Colleagues, she said. Friends of friends, people who are important to our circle. Our circle. I noted the phrase. Constance, seated at her usual place, the chair nearest the window that she had claimed within a week of moving in, added her voice the way she always did. Precisely timed, supportive of Diane, and framed as neutral wisdom. An anniversary is not just a celebration, Harold. It is a statement. People remember how you present yourself. I took a sip of water. How much is this going to cost? Diane set her fork down with a small, precise motion. I am handling the budget. You do not need to worry about it. I would like a number, I said. She held my gaze for a moment, the same look she gave me when I questioned the refinancing 4 years ago. Patient on the surface, dismissive underneath. Around 40,000, she said. $40,000. For a party, for our anniversary, for 80 people I had never met. The old Harold would have said, looks good. The new Harold said, that is a lot of money. Diane smiled. It is an investment in our image, Harold. You cannot put a price on how people perceive you. Constance nodded. Appearance is the first language people speak. I did not argue. I finished dinner, cleared my plate, and went to the garage. I sat in my truck with the engine off, the garage door closed, the overhead light casting that yellow half-dark that makes a space feel honest, and I called the only person I trusted completely outside of my daughter. Augustus Coleman answered on the second ring. Harold, you never call this late. Who died? Gus, 59 years old, master electrician, licensed in 3 states, built his business from a single van and a toolbox. We met at a job site in 1989 when I was 22 and he was 24. Both of us covered in red dust and arguing about whether a retaining wall needed 3 inches or 4 inches of rebar coverage. He said 3, I said 4. The building code said I was right. He bought me a beer afterward and said, I like a man who checks the numbers. We had been friends for 35 years. My brother, I said. Franklin. Gus was quiet for a beat. Franklin? What happened? He died 3 weeks ago. Heart attack. I just found out. Lord Harold, I am sorry. I told him everything. The phone call from Victor, the estate, the $3,800,000, the buildings, the investments, the letter. Franklin watching me from a distance all those years, driving past my house, sitting in the back row of my bridge ceremony. Gus listened without interrupting, which was one of the many reasons he had been my best friend for 3.5 decades. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Have you told Diane? No. Good. I frowned in the dark truck. Good. Harold, I have known you for 35 years. I have watched you hand that woman every dollar you have ever earned and thank her for taking it. I have watched her mother move into your house and rearrange your entire life like she was redecorating a living room nobody asked her to touch. I have watched you shrink, Harold, year after year. A little smaller every Christmas. A little quieter every time Patrice and I come over for dinner and Diane talks over you like you are background noise in your own house. I did not say anything because I did not know what to say. He continued, I have kept my mouth shut because it was not my place. But if you are asking me now, and you are asking me because you called me and not her, then I am telling you straight. Do not hand them this money. Not until you understand what they have been doing with the money you already gave them. What do you mean? I mean, have you ever actually looked at your own finances, Harold? Not the little summary Diane gives you at the end of the month. The actual accounts. The actual balances. The actual movement of money. I was quiet. That is what I thought, Gus said. He exhaled. Look before you leap, brother. You build bridges for a living. You know what happens when you do not check the foundation before you put weight on it. I ended the call and sat in the dark garage for a long time, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. The next morning, I did something I had not done in 20 years. I went to the bank, not to deposit a check, not to use the ATM. I walked into First National on South Tryon Street at 9:15 in the morning, asked to see a manager, and sat down across from a woman named Angela Parsons, who offered me coffee and pulled up our household accounts. What I saw over the next 45 minutes rewired my understanding of my own life. The joint checking account had a balance of $11,400. That seemed low for a household with my income, but not alarming on its own. The joint savings account had a balance of $22,000. Again, lower than I expected for 20 years of marriage on a six-figure salary, but Diane had always talked about diversification and moving money into better-performing instruments. I had accepted that. I had always accepted that. Then Angela said, "Would you like to review the other accounts linked to your household profile?" "What other accounts?" She turned the screen toward me. There were two additional accounts I had never seen. The first was a money market account in Diane's name alone, listed as a sub-account under our household profile, with a balance of $84,600. The second was a savings account in Constance Ridley's name, also linked to the household profile, with a balance of $41,200. I stared at the screen. My mouth went dry. When were these opened? Angela checked. The money market was opened in 2017. The savings account in 2018. 7 years. Diane had been siphoning money into her own accounts for 7 years. I did the math the way I do every calculation, precisely, without rounding, without hoping the numbers would be different. If she had moved an average of $2,200 per month, which matched the difference between what my salary should have accumulated and what was actually in our joint accounts, the total over 7 years was approximately $184,800. $184,800. Moved quietly, consistently, $2,200 at a time. From a man who never checked because he trusted his wife. From a man whose own mother-in-law called him manageable. From a man who said looks good every month for 20 years without ever once looking at anything at all. I thanked Angela. I asked her to print statements for all 4 accounts going back 3 years. She hesitated. I reminded her calmly that the household profile was registered under my Social Security number. She printed 67 pages of statements. I placed them in a manila envelope, thanked her again, and walked out into the January sunlight on South Tryon Street. I stood on the sidewalk for a full minute looking at the envelope in my hands. Not heavy in a physical sense, but in every other sense, it was the heaviest thing I had ever carried. That afternoon, from my office, I called Victor Aldrich. "I need a referral," I said. "A family law attorney, someone discreet, someone who does not lose." He gave me the name Renata Cross. I met Renata 2 days later. Her office was on the 23rd floor of a building in South Park. Clean lines, glass walls, no decorative nonsense. She was 44 years old, direct in the way that only people who bill $600 an hour can afford to be, and she had the kind of legal mind that treated wasted words the way I treated structural deficiencies. Eliminate them before they cause damage. 4s. I showed her the bank statements. I told her about the inheritance. I told her about the $40,000 anniversary party. I told her about the mortgage conversations that had been escalating for weeks. Diane and Constance pressing me to take out a $640,000 loan against our paid-off home. She studied the statements for 15 minutes, making notes in the margins with a red pen. Then she looked up. "Your wife has been systematically redirecting marital income into accounts she controls," she said. "The amounts are structured to avoid drawing attention. Small enough to blend into household spending fluctuations, but large enough to accumulate significantly over time. This is financial infidelity at minimum. Depending on intent and coordination, and the fact that her mother is involved suggests significant coordination. It may constitute fraud." What are my options? Renata leaned back. "You have several. But before we discuss strategy, I need to know what you want. Divorce, Confrontation? Restitution? All three? I thought about it, not for a second. I had been thinking about it for days. I want the truth on the record, I said, and I want my daughter to know who her father actually is. Renata nodded once. Then we build the case before we make a single move. No confrontation until we are bulletproof. Can you maintain normal behavior at home? I have been maintaining normal behavior for 20 years, I said. A few more weeks will not be difficult. She almost smiled. Good. Then here is what we do. The investigation lasted 10 weeks. I did not rush it because rushing is how you make mistakes, and mistakes in a family investigation destroy the evidence and the family simultaneously. I was not trying to destroy my family. I was trying to see it clearly for the first time. Renata obtained additional financial records through legal discovery channels. I pulled property records from the Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds. Marcus Boone, a colleague at Callaway and Briggs who handled contract compliance and had a background in forensic accounting, agreed to help me review the documentation off the record after I bought him lunch and told him just enough to secure his discretion. The next morning at work, I did something I had never done in 32 years at Callaway and Briggs. I closed my office door. I never close my office door. It is one of those things people notice without commenting on, and Marcus noticed. He was 48, had worked across the hall from me for 11 years, and had the kind of mind that read financial statements the way I read load calculations, with instinct and suspicion in equal measure. At lunch, he knocked twice and opened the door without waiting. "You closed your door today," he said. "In 11 years, I have never seen you close your door. Either somebody died or you are hiding something." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "Both." Marcus sat down. I told him enough. Not everything. Enough to explain what I needed. He listened the way engineers listen, quietly, structurally, waiting for the data before forming an opinion. When I finished, he said, "You want me to look at property records and LLC filings?" "Yes," he nodded. "Give me 24 hours. Marcus came back the next day with a legal pad covered in notes. He had pulled the Ridley Holdings LLC filing from the North Carolina Secretary of State's website. He had cross-referenced the registered agent with the mortgage broker listed on the South End condo transaction. He had found the pending line of credit application through a contact at the lending institution who owed him a favor from a construction dispute 3 years prior. "Harold," he said, setting the legal pad on my desk, "your wife and her mother are not amateurs. This is structured. The LLC was filed with a registered agent in Raleigh, not Charlotte, to reduce the chance of anyone in your immediate network stumbling across it. The mortgage broker they use specializes in investor loans, not residential, which means they deliberately chose someone who would not ask why the primary earner was not on the application. And the line of credit application is aggressive. $366,000 on top of the existing $274. If both obligations default, the total exposure against your personal financial profile is $640,000. I stared at the number he had circled 3 times on the legal pad. $640,000. "There is one more thing," Marcus said. He flipped to the last page. The second property they are targeting for acquisition. It is a duplex in Dilworth, listed at $420,000. If they close on that, they would need additional financing, and the only remaining asset large enough to collateralize is your house. Not a lien, full collateral. They would effectively be betting your home on a real estate portfolio you do not know about and do not control. I sat back in my chair. The fluorescent light above my desk hummed. Outside, a concrete truck rumbled past the window on its way to a job site. The world was still moving. My world had just stopped. Marcus looked at me. "What do you want to do?" "I want to build a file that cannot be argued with," I said. "Then let me help," he replied. "Because what they are doing is not just dishonest, Harold. It is dangerous. One missed payment, one market dip, one tenant default, and you lose everything while they walk away behind the liability shield of an LLC with your name nowhere on it." Marcus spent 3 evenings that week at my kitchen table after Diane and Constance had gone to bed. We worked quietly, Laptops open, documents spread across the table I had eaten dinner at for 18 years without ever looking underneath. He helped me trace the money trail from the joint account through 2 intermediate transfers to the Ridley Holdings operating account. He identified a pattern of withdrawals that coincided with mortgage payments on the South End condo, payments that Diane had been making from funds I thought were going toward household maintenance and insurance. On the third evening, we almost got caught. At 11:14, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Constance. She moved quietly, but old houses have a language of their own, and I knew the sound of the fourth step from the top, the one with the creak that I had been meaning to fix for 6 years. I closed my laptop. Marcus swept his papers into his bag. By the time Constance appeared in the kitchen doorway in her bathrobe, Marcus was standing at the counter pouring coffee, and I was leaning against the refrigerator with my arms crossed. Constance looked at Marcus, then at me. "A late night for company," she said. "Marcus is helping me with a load analysis for the Highway 74 project," I said. "We are behind schedule." Marcus nodded. "Your son-in-law makes the best coffee at midnight, Mrs. Ridley." He smiled. Constance did not. She looked at the kitchen table. It was clean. The papers were in Marcus's bag. The laptops were closed. There was nothing to see. But I watched her eyes move across the surface of that table, and I could tell she was reading it the way she read everything, looking for what was underneath. "I did not know engineers worked this late," she said. "Bridges do not build themselves," I replied. She held my gaze for 2 seconds. Then she said, "Good night, Harold," turned, and went back upstairs. The fourth step creaked. Marcus exhaled. "That woman has radar," he whispered. "That woman has been running reconnaissance on me for 12 years, I said. "She just does not know that I finally started running my own." What we found over those weeks made the bank accounts look like a prologue. Diane and Constance had formed a limited liability company called Ridley Holdings, LLC. It was registered in North Carolina, filed 14 months earlier, with Diane Ridley Monroe and Constance Ridley listed as managing members. My name appeared nowhere in the filing. Ridley Holdings had purchased a 3-bedroom condominium in South End, Charlotte for $318,000. The purchase was financed through a mortgage of $274,000. The mortgage application listed Diane's income as co-owner of household assets and referenced our family home as supplemental collateral. My credit score, my income, my employment history, my 32-year tenure at Callaway and Briggs, all used to secure a loan for a property I did not know existed, titled to a company I was not part of. And the pending line of credit of $366,000 would bring the total debt exposure linked to my financial identity to $640,000, all leveraged against a life I built, all authorized by people who never asked my permission. When I showed the complete picture to Renata, she was quiet for 10 seconds. Then she said, "This is mortgage fraud. Your wife and her mother used your financial identity to secure debt obligations without your knowledge or consent. They used your home as collateral on a property you have no legal interest in, and they are attempting to extend that exposure further." What does that mean practically? It means that if either loan defaults, the bank can come after your house. Your home, Harold, the one you have been paying a mortgage on for 18 years. I sat in her office and felt the floor shift beneath me. Not literally, but the way it shifts when you are standing on a bridge and you feel the first vibration that tells you something deep in the structure has begun to fail. Renata continued, "We need to separate your assets immediately. The inheritance must be declared separate property and placed in a protected structure. Your salary needs to be partially redirected to accounts you alone control. And we need to decide whether to report the mortgage fraud to the authorities or use it as leverage in a divorce proceeding, or both." I said both. Over the following weeks, I built the case the way I build a bridge, layer by layer, connection by connection. Every piece tested before the next one was placed. I opened new accounts in my name alone at a different bank. I filed the declaration of separate property for Franklin's inheritance. Victor transferred the estate assets into a trust managed by an independent fiduciary. I redirected 60% of my direct deposit to my personal account, leaving enough in the joint account to cover household bills without raising immediate alarm. I also extracted evidence from the shared household computer. Diane had never password protected her email because she never imagined I would look. The emails between her and Constance were meticulous and devastating. They discussed the LLC, the condo, the line of credit, the timeline for the second property acquisition, and me. He will never know, Diane wrote in one email dated September of the previous year. He does not understand finance. He understands concrete and steel. As long as the joint account looks stable, he will not look deeper. Constance replied, "The key is consistency. Change nothing in his daily routine." He is a man of patterns. Patterns are predictable. Predictable is manageable. Manageable. My mother-in-law called me manageable the way you describe a thermostat. Something you set and forget. Another email from November. Diane wrote, "Mother, the line of credit application is in. If we get the 366, we can close on the Dilworth property before spring. By the time Harold even hears about it, the rental income will be covering the payments, and there will be nothing to argue about." Constance replied, "Make sure the anniversary party is memorable. A happy husband is a compliant husband. A happy husband is a compliant husband." I read that sentence 11 times. Each time it landed the same way, like a punch that does not bruise the outside but collapses something internal. I printed every email. I dated every document. I organized everything into a binder that Renata reviewed page by page, marking each item with colored tabs. Green for civil evidence, red for criminal exposure, yellow for leverage. The binder grew to 143 pages. At home, I was impeccable. The same Harold, quiet, agreeable, predictable. I ate dinner. I nodded at Diane's anniversary party updates. I listened to Constance's observations about interest rates and market windows. One evening in late February, Diane left a document on the kitchen counter and asked me to sign it. She said it was an updated insurance form. I picked it up, glanced at it, and said, "I will sign it at the office tomorrow where I can make a copy for my files." She said, "You do not need to copy an insurance form, Harold." I said, "I copy everything." She held my eyes for a beat too long. Then she said, "Fine, bring it to work." I brought it to Renata instead. It was not an insurance form. It was a consent document that would have added my signature to the Ridley Holdings LLC operating agreement, retroactively authorizing all financial activity conducted in the company's name using my credit profile. Renata stared at it. Then she looked at me and said, "They are trying to legitimize the fraud after the fact. If you had signed this, it would have significantly weakened any future legal challenge." She was building a paper trail to protect herself. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not fear, recognition. This was not carelessness on Diane's part. This was engineering. She was building a structure too, just not the kind that holds. The kind that traps. I told Diane I had left the form at the office. She did not ask again, which told me she was already working on another approach. In the weeks that followed, the pressure to sign the mortgage escalated in ways that were creative, coordinated, and increasingly difficult to deflect without revealing that I knew about the larger scheme. Diane's approach shifted 3 times. The first was the rational approach. She left financial articles on my nightstand, cut from newspapers, printed from websites, bookmarked in magazines, all about the benefits of real estate investment, the advantages of leveraging equity, the danger of letting assets sit idle. She did not mention them directly. She just left them there, like seeds in soil, trusting the exposure to do the work. The second was the emotional approach. One evening in mid-February, she sat beside me on the couch and took my hand. She spoke softly. "Harold, I know I handle a lot of the finances, and I know that sometimes it might feel like I am making decisions without you. I do not mean to do that. I just want us to be secure. I want us to build something that lasts." She looked at me with an expression that, 2 months ago, I would have called tenderness. Now I recognized it as precision, every word chosen, every pause calibrated. She was performing the version of herself most likely to produce my signature. I squeezed her hand and said, I appreciate that, Diane. Let me think about it. The third approach was Constance, deployed alone, which told me they had decided the direct mother-daughter tandem was not working and needed a different angle. Constance found me in the garage on a Saturday morning while I was changing the oil in my truck. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me the way she always watched me, with the patience of someone who has already decided the outcome and is simply waiting for the subject to arrive at it. Harold, she said, I want to talk to you about something personal. I kept my eyes on the oil pan. Go ahead. When my husband died, she said, I made a mistake. I sat on the assets he left me instead of growing them. I sold the house in Raleigh too late. I missed 3 years of market appreciation. I lost, by my estimate, about $70,000 in value because I was afraid to move. She paused. I do not want that for you and Diane. I looked up at her. She was backlit by the morning sun, her face shadowed, her posture composed. She looked like a woman offering wisdom. She looked like a woman who had rehearsed every word. I appreciate you telling me that, Constance, I said. That must have been difficult. It was, she said, which is why I am telling you now. Do not let fear make the decision for you. You have a window. Use it. I nodded slowly. I will think about it. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she said, Do not think too long, Harold. Windows close. She turned and walked back into the house. I watched her go and thought about the email she had written to Diane 3 months earlier. A happy husband is a compliant husband. And I thought about how skillfully she had just performed concern while engineering compliance. Constance Ridley was not a mother-in-law. She was an operator, and I was running out of time before the operation reached a point where my non-cooperation would trigger their suspicion. I called Renata that afternoon. They are escalating, I said. The pressure is getting harder to deflect without tipping them off. How much longer do you need? She asked. 2 more weeks for the binder to be complete. Then give them 2 more weeks of the old Harold, she said. Nod, hesitate, ask one question, then nod again. You have done it for 20 years. You can do it for 14 more days. She was right. I had. 1 week before the anniversary party, Diane made her boldest move. She scheduled a meeting at the bank without telling me and then presented it as a casual errand. We should stop by First National on the way to the dry cleaner, she said on a Wednesday afternoon. I want to ask about rates. Just a conversation. 10 minutes. I agreed because refusing would have been conspicuous. But when we walked in, we were not directed to the teller windows. We were escorted to a glass-walled office on the 2nd floor where a man in a tailored suit was already waiting. Daniel Brooks, senior lending officer, early 50s. The kind of handshake that communicated authority and the kind of smile that communicated sales. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe, he said, gesturing to 2 leather chairs positioned in front of his desk. Diane tells me you are considering a strategic investment. Diane had already spoken to him. She had prepared the ground. The folder on his desk was thick. My name was printed on the first page. I sat down. I kept my face neutral. Daniel walked me through the proposal. $640,000 in total financing. A consolidated structure linking the existing South End property with a new acquisition. Our home as primary collateral. My income as the basis for qualification. Joint signatures required. He slid the paperwork across the desk. Everything is pre-approved, pending your signature, he said. This is an excellent rate. We have held it for 3 weeks, but I am being transparent with you, Mr. Monroe. It expires next Friday. I picked up the document. I turned 3 pages. I read the collateral section. I read the liability clause. I read the signature block where my name was already typed, waiting for ink. I looked at Daniel. Who initiated this application? He glanced at Diane. Mrs. Monroe submitted the initial inquiry. And the financial documentation? My income verification? My credit authorization? Those were provided as part of the pre-qualification process, he said carefully. By whom? Another glance at Diane. By Mrs. Monroe, on behalf of the household. I set the document down. I placed both hands flat on the desk. Mr. Brooks, I said. Has anyone from this institution independently verified that I authorized the use of my financial information in this application? Daniel's composure shifted, just slightly. The way a structure shifts when you test a connection that is not as secure as it appears. That would typically be handled through the joint account authorization on file, he said. I nodded. And if I told you that I did not authorize this specific application, what would that mean for the pre-approval? The room went very still. Diane's hand moved to my arm. Harold, she said, let us not make this complicated. I am not making it complicated, I said. I am asking a simple question. Daniel cleared his throat. If there is any question about authorization, we would need to pause the process and re-verify all submissions. Then pause it, I said. I stood up. I thanked Daniel for his time. I shook his hand, and I walked out of the office with Diane 2 steps behind me, her heels clicking against the marble floor with a rhythm that had lost its usual confidence. In the car, she said nothing for 3 blocks. Then she said, "You embarrassed me in there." I kept my eyes on the road. I asked a question, Diane. If a question embarrasses you, the problem is not the question. She did not speak again until we got home. That night, the house was silent in a way that had weight. Not peaceful silence, strategic silence. The kind that means everyone is recalculating. On a Thursday night in early March, I came home from work and parked in the driveway. It was 7:22. The kitchen lights were on. I could see Diane and Constance moving inside, their silhouettes familiar and precise. I turned off the engine and was reaching for my briefcase when I heard something. We had a baby monitor in the house, an old one. We had bought it when Nadine was born 28 years ago, and it had never been removed from the kitchen shelf. It was one of those analog models that broadcast on a simple radio frequency. Years ago, I had discovered that the receiver, which I kept in the garage on a shelf above my workbench, still picked up the kitchen transmitter if both units were plugged in. I had mentioned it to Diane once, years ago, and she had laughed and said, "Who would we be spying on?" I had unplugged the receiver and forgotten about it. But 3 weeks ago, when the investigation was deepening and I was looking for any edge I could find, I had plugged it back in. Now sitting in my truck with the windows up and the garage door still closed, I reached over to the receiver sitting on the passenger seat. I had started carrying it in my briefcase. I turned the volume up. Diane's voice came through, slightly static, but clear enough. "The rate hold expires Friday," she was saying. "If he does not sign by then, we lose the terms." Constance's voice, "Then he signs by Friday." What is the resistance? He has been different lately, asking questions he never asks, wanting to see numbers. He even asked who controls the management entity. A pause, then Constance. "That is unusual." "I know," Diane said. "I do not like it. Something is off." My hands tightened on the receiver. Constance said, "Has he been talking to someone?" "I do not think so. Who would he talk to?" "He does not have friends." "He has that electrician," Constance said. "Gus?" Diane's tone was dismissive. "Gus is a blue-collar handyman. He does not know anything about finance. Do not underestimate men who work with their hands," Constance said. "They notice things." Another pause. Then Diane said, "It does not matter. Harold will sign. He always signs. He does not have the constitution for conflict. He would rather agree than argue. That is who he is. That is who he has always been." Constance made a small sound. "What about the anniversary party? Is everything confirmed?" "Everything. 80 guests, the ballroom, the caterer. The cake is $2,800, but it is spectacular. By the time the toast is done and the champagne is flowing, he will feel celebrated and grateful, and he will sign anything I put in front of him the next morning. A compliant husband." "Yes," Constance said, "a compliant husband." I turned the receiver off. I sat in my truck in the dark garage for 12 minutes. I know because I watched the dashboard clock, 7:24 to 7:36. I did not move. I did not make a sound. I just sat there feeling the last thin cable of my marriage reach its breaking load and snap. Then I went inside, kissed Diane on the cheek, sat down at the dinner table, and said, "Something smells good." "What is for dinner?" Chicken, she said. Simple tonight. I smiled. Perfect. And I ate every bite. 2 weeks before the anniversary party, I drove to Greensboro. Nadine Monroe Davis, 28 years old. She taught fourth grade at a public school near the university. She had married a good man named Derek Davis who worked in hospital administration. She was 5 months pregnant with my first grandchild. Nadine is the reason I did not simply file for divorce and disappear. She deserved to understand. Not Diane's version, the one that would be crafted after the fact, polished and persuasive. The truth. Even when the truth is ugly, especially when it is ugly, it is the only inheritance worth passing down. Derek was at work. Nadine made coffee and sat across from me at her kitchen table. She was showing. Her hand rested on her belly the way pregnant women do. Protective, unconscious, permanent. I looked at my daughter and saw my mother and my father and Franklin and myself all at once. All the best things about the people I had loved carried forward in a woman who had no idea how strong she was about to need to be. I told her everything. The accounts, the $184,800, the LLC, the condo, the line of credit application, the $640,000 in total exposure, the emails, the baby monitor conversations, the consent form disguised as an insurance document, the inheritance from Franklin. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Her coffee sat untouched. Then she said, "Daddy, how long have you known?" "About 3 months," I said. She shook her head slowly. I always knew something was off. The way Mama talked about money like it was hers. The way Grandma Constance looked at you sometimes, like you were a problem she had already solved. I thought it was just their personality. I did not think they were actually stealing from you. I reached across the table and took her hand. I am not telling you this to turn you against your mother. I am telling you because you are about to bring a child into the world, and you deserve to know what honesty looks like, even when it is the hardest thing in the room. She squeezed my hand. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "What are you going to do?" I told her my plan. The anniversary party, the toast, the petition, all of it. She stared at me. "At the party, Daddy, in front of 80 people? Are you sure?" "I am sure," I said. She had 20 years of controlling the narrative in private. I am giving the truth one night in public. Nadine exhaled slowly. Then she said something that broke me open in the best possible way. She said, "Franklin was right about you. You are the most consistent man alive, and that is not a small thing, Daddy. That is the whole thing." I held my daughter's hand across the table and thought about my brother's letter and my father's bricks and every bridge I had ever designed, every calculation I had ever checked twice, every load I had ever tested before I trusted it. I had spent my whole life making sure things held. Now I was going to let something fall on purpose, and I was going to do it in front of 80 people because some things need witnesses. April 12th, 2024. The night of the party. The Grand Over Resort and Spa, Greensboro, North Carolina. Diane had chosen Greensboro because it was close to several of Constance's social connections from her years in Raleigh, women whose opinion Constance valued the way engineers value building codes. As gospel, the ballroom was immaculate. 20 round tables draped in ivory linen. Centerpieces of white roses and eucalyptus, 14 of them, at $110 each. A 5-piece jazz ensemble playing Coltrane and Miles Davis in the corner. A 3-tier anniversary cake that cost $2,800 and looked like it belonged in a magazine. A photo booth with a custom backdrop that read Harold and Diane, 20 years in gold script. Open bar. Past hors d'oeuvres, shrimp cocktail, fig and prosciutto crostini, mini crab cakes, filet mignon and lobster tail for the entree. A champagne tower, 80 place settings with calligraphed name cards. I had obtained the invoice through Renata's discovery process. The final total was $41,612, paid from the joint account. Money I had earned designing bridges at Callaway and Briggs. For a party celebrating a marriage built on theft. I wore a charcoal suit, the nicest one I owned. Diane wore a burgundy gown that I estimated cost somewhere between $800 and $1,200, but that I did not ask about because the old Herald would not have asked. Constance wore cream-colored silk and pearls and sat at the head table like a queen presiding over court. 80 guests filled the room. I recognized perhaps a third. Diane's friends, Constance's Raleigh circle, a handful of people from the dental practice where Diane used to work, a few neighbors. The rest were strangers to me, people who mattered to the image Diane and Constance had constructed, an image that required my money but not my input. Gus and Patrice were seated at table 14 near the back. Gus wore a navy sports coat that was slightly too tight across the shoulders and a tie that Patrice had clearly selected for him. When I passed his table during the cocktail hour, he looked at me and gave the smallest nod. I returned it. Nadine and Derek arrived late at 7:45. Nadine wore a green dress that accommodated her belly, and she hugged me at the door and whispered, "I am here, Daddy." I squeezed her hand once and let go. The first 2 hours passed the way these things pass. Cocktails, small talk, strangers shaking my hand and saying, 20 years, congratulations, you are a lucky man. Diane at my side, her hand on my arm, her smile calibrated and public. She introduced me to people whose names dissolved the moment they were spoken because they did not matter. What mattered was the toast. At 8:30, the jazz ensemble paused. Diane's friend Monica, who was serving as the evening's MC, tapped the microphone and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats." The couple of the evening would like to say a few words. Diane and I stood together at the head table. She leaned into me, her mouth close to my ear, and whispered, "Keep it short, Harold. These are important people." I nodded once. Diane went first. She was polished, practiced. She thanked the guests. She thanked her mother, my rock, my compass, my best friend. She thanked God for 20 years of partnership. She talked about building a life together, about trust, about the foundation of a strong marriage. She used the word foundation 3 times. Each time, I felt something tighten behind my sternum. Because I know what foundations actually are, and I know what happens when they are hollow. She finished to applause, warm and generous and completely uninformed. Then she turned to me and gestured toward the microphone with a smile that said, "Your turn. Make it brief." I stood. I adjusted my jacket. I looked out at the room. 80 faces, candlelight, crystal glasses catching the chandelier, white roses on every table. The jazz ensemble quiet, instruments resting. Nadine was at table 12 near the back wall, Derek's hand on her shoulder, her eyes on mine. She gave me the smallest nod. I began. "Thank you all for being here tonight. My wife planned this evening, and as always, she did a remarkable job. $41,612 remarkable, to be exact." A few people chuckled, assuming it was a self-deprecating joke about expensive wives. Diane's smile thinned by a fraction. 20 years of marriage is a long time, I continued. And in 20 years, you learn things about a person. You learn their habits, their preferences, their patterns. My wife, for example, has a pattern with numbers. She is extraordinary with numbers. Better than most people in this room will ever know. Diane's hand found my wrist under the tablecloth. She squeezed, not affectionately, warningly. I did not look at her. For example, I have learned that over the past 7 years, approximately $2,200 per month has been quietly moved from our joint accounts into 2 private accounts that I did not know existed until January of this year. One account is in Diane's name. One is in her mother Constance's name. The total, over 7 years, is approximately $184,800 of my money, earned at my job, moved without my knowledge, without my consent. The room changed. Not the lighting, not the temperature. The air itself changed. It went from celebration to something else, something tight and alert and charged. The way the air changes before a storm that everyone can feel but no one can see yet. Diane's grip on my wrist became a vice. "Harold," she said through her teeth, "stop, right now," I continued. I have also learned that 14 months ago, my wife and her mother formed a limited liability company called Ridley Holdings, LLC. This company purchased a condominium in South End, Charlotte for $318,000, financed with a mortgage that used my income, my credit, and our family home as collateral. My name does not appear on the LLC. I was not consulted. I did not consent. The total debt exposure linked to my financial identity, including a pending line of credit application I also did not authorize, is $640,000. The silence in that room was absolute. 80 people frozen, forks suspended, glasses untouched. The jazz bassist shifted in his chair. The bartender stopped polishing a glass. Even the candle flames seemed to still. Constance stood up. Her face had lost all color. Her voice came out tight and controlled. "Harold, this is not the place for this." I looked at her. "You are right, Constance. This is a party. A $41,000 party paid for with money my wife redirected from our household, which makes it the perfect place for this, because everyone in this room is a witness to how that money was spent." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a document, folded once, clean and precise. I set it on the table beside the anniversary cake. "This is a petition for divorce," I said, "filed yesterday with the Mecklenburg County Family Court. My attorney, Renata Cross, will be in contact regarding the financial fraud, the mortgage fraud, the unauthorized use of my financial identity, and the disposition of all assets, including the 143 pages of documentation I have compiled over the past 3 months." Diane was staring at me, not with anger, not yet, with something closer to shock. The same expression you see on a person's face when the ground they were standing on turns out to be a sinkhole. When the structure they built their entire strategy on turns out to have no foundation at all. She said, "You do not know what you are doing." "I know exactly what I am doing," I said. "For the first time in 20 years, I know exactly what I'm doing." I turned to the room. "I owe all of you an apology for disrupting your evening. This is not the toast any of you expected. But I spent 20 years being the man who did not ask questions, who did not check the numbers, who signed whatever was put in front of him because he believed that trust was enough. It was not. And I owe it to myself, to my daughter, and to the memory of my brother Franklin, who left me everything he had because he believed I was worth trusting, to stand in front of you and say that out loud." I picked up my glass of water because I had not touched the champagne. "To honesty," I said, "even when it is the hardest thing in the room." Nadine raised her glass from table 12. Then Derek. Then Gus, standing now. His too tight jacket straining at the shoulders. His face carrying the expression of a man who had been waiting 35 years for this exact moment. No one else raised a glass. That was fine. I did not need 80 people. I needed the right ones. I set the glass down, buttoned my jacket, and walked toward the ballroom door. My footsteps were the only sound. 80 people. Not one of them made a noise. Diane called after me. Harold, come back here. We can talk about this. Harold." I did not stop. I did not slow down. I walked through the ballroom doors, through the lobby of the Grand Over, past the valet stand, and into the April night. The air was cool. Dogwood trees were blooming along the circular drive, their white petals catching the landscape lights. The parking lot was quiet except for the distant, muffled sound of the jazz ensemble starting up again inside. Because bands play what they are paid to play regardless of what is happening in the room. The first 72 hours after the party were a controlled detonation. By Sunday morning, Diane had called 11 of the 80 guests to perform damage control. I know this because Nadine heard from a family friend who received one of those calls. Diane's message was consistent and polished. Harold is going through a difficult time. He lost his brother recently and has not been himself. I am heartbroken. We are seeking counseling. Please keep us in your prayers. She was rewriting the story in real time. turning a revelation into a breakdown, turning evidence into emotion, turning accountability into sympathy. It was, I had to admit, skillful. But it was also too late. Constance left the house on Monday. Not because I asked her to. I had not returned since the party. She left because Renata's office sent a formal letter to the house, addressed to Constance Ridley, informing her that she was named as a co-respondent in the civil action, and that her continued residence in the marital home could constitute a conflict of interest during proceedings. Constance moved to a furnished apartment in Raleigh that same week. She did not say goodbye to me. She did not need to. Everything she had ever wanted to say to me was in those emails. Manageable, predictable, compliant. Those were her goodbye words. She just did not know I had read them. At work, Marcus was the only person who knew the full story. But offices are ecosystems, and ecosystems talk. By the following Monday, the general understanding at Callaway and Briggs was that Harold Monroe had done something extraordinary at his anniversary party, though the details varied depending on who was telling the story. Some said I had exposed an affair, some said I had announced a windfall. One version, which Marcus traced to an intern who had overheard a phone call, claimed I had revealed that I was secretly a millionaire. That version was closer to the truth than any of them. My boss, Glenn Callaway, a 71-year-old founding partner who had hired me 32 years ago and who communicated almost exclusively in structural metaphors, called me into his office on Tuesday. "Harold," he said, "I hear you had an eventful weekend. You could say that." He leaned back in his chair and studied me over his reading glasses. "Whatever happened, you are at your desk on time on Monday. That tells me everything I need to know about you." He paused. "If you need anything, time, flexibility, a conversation, my door's open." "I appreciate that, Glenn." He nodded once, then he said, "One more thing. Whatever you are building next, build it the way you build everything else, right?" I went back to my desk and worked an 11-hour day without closing my door. The community response was mixed, as community responses always are. Some of Diane's friends, the ones who had been at the party, viewed me as a man who had humiliated his wife in public. Others, particularly those who learned the details later, viewed the situation differently. Gus told me that Patrice had received 4 phone calls in 1 week from women who had heard the story through various channels, and every single one of them said the same thing. Good for him. Pastor David Hensley called me on a Wednesday evening. "Harold," he said, "I heard about what happened. I do not know the details, and I'm not asking for them. But I want you to know that truth told in love is still love, even when it does not look like it." I said, "Thank you, Pastor." I was not sure it was love when I did it. He said, "The fact that you are not sure is exactly why it was." Gus was leaning against my truck in the Grandover parking lot. His tie was already loosened. "You magnificent son of a gun," he said. "How did you know I was doing it tonight?" "Nadine called me," he said. "She told me I needed to be here, and she was right." I looked at my friend standing in a parking lot in Greensboro in a jacket that did not fit, grinning at me like I had just won something. And I realized that I had. Not a battle, not a victory. Something simpler than that. I had won back the right to be the man my father raised and my brother believed in. The man who checks every number. The man who does not sign until he understands. The man who builds things that hold. Gus clapped me on the shoulder. "Go get some rest, Harold. Not their house. Your house." I drove to a Holiday Inn off I-85 that night. $87 a night. I sat on the bed and ate a turkey sandwich from a gas station and drank a bottle of water and read Franklin's letter one more time. Do not let anyone else manage this for you. Manage it yourself. You have always been smarter than you think. I folded the letter, set it on the nightstand, turned off the lamp, and slept better than I had slept in years. The aftermath was not clean. I do not want to pretend it was. Real life does not wrap up the way people want it to. Diane called 23 times in the first 48 hours. The first calls were rage. "How dare you embarrass me in front of my guests? Do you know what you have done to my reputation? Do you have any idea what people are saying?" The middle calls were strategic, cooler, more measured. The Diane I recognized. Harold, let us sit down like adults. This does not have to be public. We can work this out with a mediator. There is no reason to involve courts. The last calls were a different frequency entirely, softer, thinner. Harold, please, I love you. I made mistakes, but I love you. Please come home. I did not answer any of them, not because I was being cruel. Because I had learned, over 3 months of investigation and 20 years of marriage, that Diane's words were tools, not truths. Every sentence was engineered to produce a specific response. I was done responding. Constance did not call, not once. She sent one text message, 4 words. You will regret this. I saved it. Renata flagged it as evidence of intimidation. The divorce moved forward with the momentum of documented evidence. Renata was relentless and precise, the legal equivalent of a controlled demolition. She did not raise her voice. She did not grandstand. She simply placed fact upon fact upon fact until the structure of Diane's defense collapsed under its own weight. Diane's attorney, a man named Graham Whitfield, who had been retained through one of Constance's Raleigh connections, arrived at the first settlement conference visibly confident and left 2 hours later visibly shaken. Renata had handed him the binder, all 143 pages, and invited him to review it in the conference room while she stepped out for coffee. He returned to the table and recommended that Diane settle. The settlement was finalized in July. I received the family home, free and clear. All accounts in my name were confirmed as separate property. The inheritance from Franklin was protected in its entirety. Diane retained her personal accounts and the Ridley Holdings condominium, but was required to refinance all associated debt without my credit, my income, or my home as collateral within 90 days. Constance was required to return the $41,200 from the savings account that had been funded with my redirected income. The criminal referral on the mortgage fraud went to the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office in May. An assistant DA named Christine Yates took the case. The investigation ran through the summer. In September, Diane was charged with 1 count of mortgage fraud and 1 count of unauthorized use of a financial identity. She accepted a plea agreement in October, 2 years of probation, full financial restitution to the lending institution, a permanent mark on her record. Constance was not charged, but the investigation established that she had been the architect of the LLC, the mortgage application, and the consent document that had been disguised as an insurance form. She was named in the civil judgment and prohibited from serving as a managing member of any LLC in North Carolina for 5 years. Her bookkeeping career, the one that had given her the skills to engineer this entire scheme, was effectively over. In August, I moved back into my house, the same house I had paid the mortgage on for 18 years. It felt different, not smaller, not sadder. Different the way a room feels different after you remove furniture that was blocking the windows. More light, more air, more space for a man to stand up straight. Constance's room was cleared out. Diane's things were gone, the laptop, the reading glasses, the files she kept in the desk drawer that I had never opened. The kitchen table where she had spread her mortgage documents and retirement brochures and carefully arranged presentations designed to secure my signature was bare. The chair by the window where Constance had sat for 12 years, monitoring and managing and calling me manageable, was empty. I did not fill those spaces immediately. I let them breathe. A house, like a man, needs time to settle after the load is redistributed. In September, I started renovating. Not because the house needed it structurally, because I needed it spiritually. I tore out the carpet in the living room and laid hardwood flooring myself, red oak, 3/4 inch, nailed every plank by hand over a weekend. I repainted the master bedroom, a color called Quiet Harbor, which Gus said sounded like a paint company's idea of therapy, but which I thought was exactly right. I built a bookshelf in the den from reclaimed lumber that Gus helped me source from a demolished AME church in Dilworth. Heart pine, 100 years old, still solid, still holding. I replaced the kitchen faucet that had been dripping for 2 years. Diane had called a plumber 3 times at $95 per visit. The fix was a $4 washer and 10 minutes of work. I stood at that sink, wrench in hand, water running clean and silent, and thought about how many things in my life had been more expensive than they needed to be because I let someone else decide how to fix them. In October, I drove to the cemetery where Franklin was buried, a small plot in a quiet memorial garden in East Charlotte near the neighborhood where we grew up. The headstone was simple. Gray granite, Franklin Earl Monroe, born 1961, died 2024. Builder. I stood there for a long time. The afternoon light came through the trees in long slants, October light, the kind that makes everything look like a memory. I said, "You were right about everything, Frank, about managing it myself, about being smarter than I thought. I do not know why you watched me all those years from a distance, instead of just picking up the phone and telling me to wake up. But I think maybe you were waiting to see if I would figure it out on my own. I think maybe that is what big brothers do. They watch, they wait. And when the time comes, they leave you exactly what you need to find your own way." I set a small object at the base of the headstone. My father's scale ruler. The one Earl Monroe had given me when I graduated from NC State. The one I had kept in my desk drawer at Callaway and Briggs for 32 years. It was not valuable in any financial sense, but it was the most honest thing I owned because it measured what was real. I said, "I am building something new, Frank, and this time I am checking every beam." In November, Nadine gave birth to a boy. 7 pounds, 9 ounces. Brown eyes, his mother's forehead, his grandfather's hands. She named him Franklin Derrick Davis. When she told me the name, I was standing in the hospital room in Greensboro, holding my grandson for the first time, and I cried in a way I had not cried since my father's funeral. Not the restrained, manageable kind of crying. The kind that comes from a place so deep you did not know it existed until it broke open. Nadine said, "Daddy, are you okay?" I said, "I am more okay than I have been in 20 years. Derek put his hand on my shoulder and said, "He has your brother's name and your father's grip. He is already holding my finger like he is never going to let go." I held baby Franklin for 45 minutes that first day. The nurses came and went. Derek brought coffee. Nadine dozed in the hospital bed, exhausted and radiant. And I sat in the vinyl recliner by the window with my grandson against my chest and watched the sun set over Greensboro through the hospital window. I talked to him, quietly. Not because I thought he could understand, but because some words need to be said out loud to become real. "Your great-grandfather was a mason," I said. "He laid brick for 41 years. He built walls that are still standing right now, today, all over this city. Your great-uncle Franklin owned buildings downtown. He climbed water towers when he was a kid, and he never stopped climbing his whole life. He was brave in ways that I am still learning to understand." Baby Franklin made a small sound. His eyes were closed. His fingers curled and uncurled against my shirt. "Your mother is the strongest woman I know," I continued. "She has her mother's organizational skills, and I mean that as a compliment, the good version of it. And your grandfather, well, your grandfather builds bridges, not the famous ones. The ones people drive over every day without thinking about, the ones that hold." I looked at his face, so new, so unmarked by any of the things that had marked me. "I am going to tell you something, and I want you to remember it even though you will not remember this moment." I lowered my voice. "Do not let anyone else manage your life for you. Not because people are bad, most people are not, but because the only person who can check every number, every bolt, every beam in your own life is you. Trust people, love people, let people in. But always, always keep your eyes open. Your great-uncle Franklin taught me that, and it took me 57 years to learn it. I am hoping you will be faster." Derek appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. He looked at me holding his son and said, "You know, Harold, I have never seen you this relaxed." I looked up at him. "This is the first time in a year that I am not building a case, reading a legal brief, or pretending to be someone I am not," I said. "So yes, I am relaxed." He laughed. He set the coffee on the side table and sat down beside me. We stayed like that for a while. 3 generations in a hospital room in Greensboro, North Carolina. A grandfather holding a grandson named after a brother who watched from a distance. The math was complicated. The feeling was simple. That Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner at my house, my table. Nadine and Derek drove down from Greensboro with baby Franklin in a car seat. Gus and his wife Patrice came, Patrice carrying a pecan pie and Gus carrying a bottle of bourbon that he said was medicinal. Marcus Boone and his girlfriend Janelle. Pastor David Hensley from the church my father had attended, 65 years old and still delivering sermons with the quiet force of a man who believes every word he says. 9 people at my table. My food, my recipes. I cooked everything: herb, brine turkey, bourbon sweet potatoes, collard greens with smoked turkey necks, cornbread dressing, cranberry relish, sweet potato pie from my mother's recipe, written in her hand on a stained index card I found in a box in the attic 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized. The card smelled like cinnamon and memory. I gave a toast. I stood at the head of my own table, in my own dining room, with hardwood floors I had laid myself and a bookshelf built from church lumber and a kitchen faucet that did not drip. And I said, last year at this time, I was sitting in someone else's version of my life. I was eating food I did not choose, at a table I did not arrange, in a role I did not design. I was useful, I was predictable, I was manageable. This year, I am standing in my own house, cooking my own food, surrounded by people who know exactly who I am and do not need me to be anything else. And that is worth more than any inheritance, any settlement, or any number on any bank statement anywhere in the world. Gus raised his glass. Amen. Patrice said, that turkey is the best thing you have ever built, Harold, and I am including bridges. Nadine said, Daddy, pass the sweet potatoes before Gus eats all of them. Baby Franklin slept through the entire toast in Derek's arms. He did not need to hear it. He would grow up inside the truth of it. By December, the estate transfers were complete. Franklin's 2 commercial buildings downtown were generating combined rental income of $19,800 per month. The investment portfolio was stable and conservatively managed. The trust was structured to provide for Nadine and baby Franklin and any future grandchildren. I appointed the management firm Victor recommended, but I reviewed every statement personally. Every number, every transaction, every quarter, every line. I also did something I had not planned. I established the Franklin Monroe Trade Scholarship, administered through the Carlett Mecklenburg Community Foundation. It awards $10,000 annually to a young person pursuing a career in the skilled trades, electrical, plumbing, masonry, carpentry, structural engineering. The kind of work that builds things you can stand on. The kind of work my father did for 41 years without missing a day. The kind of work that holds. Gus cried when I told him about the scholarship. He said, that is the best thing you have ever done, Harold. I said, it is the best thing Franklin ever did. I am just the delivery mechanism. He said, no, brother, you are the foundation. On New Year's Eve, I sat on my back porch with a glass of Woodford Reserve and watched the fireworks pop over the Charlotte skyline. The air was cold. January in North Carolina, not bitter, but honest. The hardwood floor of the porch, which I had refinished myself in September, was solid under my boots. My phone buzzed. A text from Nadine. A photo of baby Franklin asleep on Derek's chest. One tiny hand wrapped around Derek's index finger. The caption said, his grandfather's grip. I looked at my hands, calloused from 32 years of job sites and renovation projects and holding things together. Steady. The hands of a man who built bridges that carried 50,000 cars a day. The hands of a man who laid his own hardwood floors. The hands of a man who cooked Thanksgiving dinner from memory and love. The hands of a man who spent 20 years not checking the numbers and 3 months making up for it. Diane had texted me once, in late December. A short message. I hope you find what you are looking for, Harold. I did not respond. Not out of malice, not out of spite. because the answer was too simple and too complicated to fit in a text message. I already found it. It was standing in my own house, looking at my own numbers, making my own decisions, cooking my own food, building my own bookshelves from reclaimed church lumber, holding my grandson for the first time, and crying without caring who saw it. Hearing my brother's voice in a letter and my father's lesson in a scale ruler. It was my daughter naming her son after the man who watched me from a distance for 15 years because he believed I was worth watching. Do not let anyone else manage this for you. Manage it yourself. You have always been smarter than you think. I am Harold Monroe. I am 57 years old. I am a structural engineer. I build bridges that carry 50,000 cars a day and have never shifted a single inch. I build bookshelves from 100-year-old heart pine. I build Thanksgiving dinners from my mother's stained recipe cards. I build scholarship funds for kids who want to work with their hands. And I rebuilt a life that no one manages, no one controls, and no one will ever call manageable again. Because I checked every beam, every cable, every bolt, every weld, and every number. They spent $40,000 of my money on a party celebrating a marriage that was built on theft. When I stood up to give a toast, my wife whispered, "Keep it short, Harold. These are important people." I did not keep it short, and for the first time in 20 years, every single word was mine.